morning, everyone. It really is a pleasure for me to be here, and I'm going to say good morning to our ambassador. Good morning, Ambassador McLaren, and Representative Mr. Knight, Mr. Lee, and certainly to all that are with us this morning from the network, from our colleague agencies. Thank you very much for joining, and I will be very brief. It is a pleasure to be here to be a part of the celebration of International Mountain Day. As director, and as director for World Heritage and Cultural Conventions in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport, yes, I love the long names in the ministry. We have been involved, my involvement in the Rwanda Mountain, and certainly that of the ministry has really spanned the World Heritage inscription, which was from 2015. So just prior to that, while we were fighting the good fight for this inscription, my involvement has really spanned that time. And the ministry has, in this past year, also developed an MOU of the first we had actually with CET to help support cultural preservation. Not as much as we'd like it to be, but certainly we hope that in the future we can do more. We are happy to be a part of the work that the JCDC is doing, and in our view, it's exemplary work. And in fact, project supporters and EU, NEPA, all our agencies that are certainly joining hands to ensure that this significant site is preserved. We thank all of them because without all of this help, what Suzanne does would certainly be harder, and it's never, we never have enough funds to do all that we need to do, but certainly with all your help it is workable, it's feasible. And so the ministry really intends to continue our own support, and we want to thank, we want to indicate that we want to, just continue to pick up JCDC for not only the work towards management of natural resources, but certainly cultural resources. So, we thank you for inviting us, and we thank you for listening, and I think that's all I will say in meetings this morning.
We're here for you pictures. So thank you so much, sir. But it does seem to be working. It's just very good. We're just going to continue. I'm sorry, I had to on tree. Next, it's representing the natural environment and
Thank you, Doc. Good morning, everyone. Special mention to Ambassador. Pleasure to be here. Heard the name before, then I saw the face. Likewise, Director. Been a while that I wanted to associate me with the pleasure is mine this morning to bring greetings on behalf of Mr. Peter Knight, who is unapologetically absent. Thank you again, JCDC, for extending this invitation to us. It's always a pleasure to be here celebrating functions or day sightings such as International Moon Day, which was so declared to emphasize the importance of mountains and life, that connection between preserving the mountains and ensuring the continuance of life. Long before I actually came into the network and understood conservation, I would have actually associated Blue Mountains with ACD. There was a time when I was a lot of my major focus both. And I would actually go out and be hiking and would always engage with ACD. Would have been some nuances in terms of the cameras and that stuff. But when it came to watershed management now, we were schooled in the importance of adopting a bridge to river approach. majority of our landscape is of interventions acknowledge that connection between our mountains and our coastlines. The National Resources Conservation Authority and its agent network has long had a partnership with JCBD. I was told that it's been 26 years, 27, that we've been partnering with JCBD. And we've had some amount of success. Susan will tell you that we definitely need some more money. We leverage towards conservation work. I know that we decided it's not, so I take that as a good indication that we're getting some money towards the conservation work. But I mean, we've seen the banners behind us, and basically have been doing a really good job at ensuring that Monday is not just one day. They've actually gone ahead and adopted certain measures to ensure that there's protection throughout the year. In fact, there was a 10-year management plan that was recently concluded, which guides activities over the Blue and Janka Mountains over the next 10 years. Again, we look at the theme for this year, International Mountain Day, and you look at the mixture of genders in the audience. You see three gentlemen, majority female, but the theme this year that women can move mountains, right? And I'm seeing it for sure. We're always here, always because even those who are not in conservation, we are aware of Dr. Growth and we are aware of the females, for example, I'm trying to see them on. I've seen already a lot of times. So we are seeing where women indeed locally have driven this cause in terms of conservation of our mountains. And very much a pleasure for me to be here and to partake in this discussion, and I'm looking forward to learning more from JCB and their partners on the activities planned for our mountain.
Thank you so much, Andre, for that. And as I said, it was very casual this morning, many reasons. And we thank you for the support from NETO, and we also greatly appreciate the support from you and the crews and that ambassador wants to spend time to be with us this morning, and so we will hear from her.
So good morning to all of you. Happy International Mountain Day. I didn't know it existed, but it's actually nice. I think the only problem is that probably most people are celebrating International Mountain Day somewhere in the mountains. But let's hope that we will be able to coordinate that seminar online. I'm very grateful for the event. Part of my job is to project lounges, seminars, webinars, go and see someone at the seminar, the International Mountain Day, I think I think so much to what we are doing, and we are supporting financially, but it's not just financially, it's about what we're really doing with our planet. And I'm very happy that this is being organized this week. So we all know that this week is very important for the preservation of our planet, because there's a very important issue going on in Canada, Tuesday, on biodiversity. We always talk about the climate change costs, but there is another cost, an alternative one, which is more about preserving what we can about nature and about biodiversity. And that movement was launched on Tuesday. So I think it's all very timely, to raise awareness about the importance of nature and sort of preserving what we have, because I don't think any history we have seen such a rapid degradation of our natural environment. So at least some people have worked on organizations such as Jamaica Conservation Development is doing an excellent job. I have a really nice picture, and I'm not going to do that. But I just want to say to use here to encourage the work. And we people who support the mountains here in Jamaica are really fundamental. As now the work we have is one of the few islands that have such a beautiful mountain. And the very rich biodiversity here. We're seeing here, which is highly appreciated, and it's the reason why we also find one more thing about the conference in Canada. A lot of these concerns, we know that we're very much putting everything which is green, real, water very high on our agenda. But in terms of biodiversity, we also signed up for something which we call the 35-30, which is a commitment to preserve 30%, say 30% of our lands and our oceans like nature. And to this goal, I was also present in the inauguration of the Jamaica Forestry Conference here in Kingston. And I was with him after, and also congratulating the minister because Jamaica has also signed up to the group that they and the organization is for. And actually the minister said that Jamaica is going to go faster and they are wanting to do it by 2025. And then I'm seeing you in a conference you in the north for doing. And I think, well, I mean, that is pretty impressive, but it is because of people. Because I do not think that the Jamaican government is capable of doing what you are doing, and that's why I'm for the fact that the government is so much trust in the Jamaica Conservation Development Trust to actually delegate a number of its responsibility as the government is highly welcome. And I really need to say that very publicly. It shows a certain connection between civil society and the government, which we think is important. I do know that the government is probably is not supporting enough. What can I say? But then let's see, we have some moments on the outside to try to give our assistance. So, yeah, I'm here because I really want to show our solidarity, our appreciation, admiration for the work that you're doing, and so thank you very much. I wanted to be here, but I'm going to give you.
Able to just move back to the table when you people and we're now going to turn over to David and and the rest of the team who are going to be presenting, and I am sure that I don't need the motion, and I am sure that they will be presenting some great information and very useful for you to better understand what we do. So we're going to move into the presentations, and for those who I understand on online who have not been hearing, partly because of the challenge there with the mic, we are going to be presenting from this side of the room, and hopefully the connection will be better from this side so that people will be able to hear and that we'll be able to also record conservation of natural heritage development, sustainable livelihoods. A lot of that, though, at the moment is with maroon communities. And then David is going to be back with us. I don't know if Wellington Taylor is going to be able to make it. Sorry, our rangers aren't here. They like to be out in the field and not at fancy meetings and seminars. So David will be sharing with you on ecosystem health and threats and what we're doing. And then we might have to shift things around a little bit because to get the timing right for Kendra to join us, she might actually have to move up. Kendra Hassani is a master's student from Chatham University in Pennsylvania, USA, and she did for her master's thesis an analysis and review of the knowledge, attitudes, and practices survey that JCDT personnel had implemented. I think it was about 2017, 2018, and we had been struggling to find someone who didn't have the funds, really did the survey in faith, and she has gotten some really, really useful information. So she'll be joining us hopefully later on if technology allows. Thanks, David, and over to you.
I'm not gonna use the mic because the webcam mic is right here, and the audio will come through clearer through the webcam. And so I'll just use this opportunity to apologize for the technical challenges we've been having. I was at the Forestry Department's conference for the last 2 days, yesterday and the day before, and it's quite a production. I'm really impressed. Um, Kudos to the Forestry Department and kudos to all our partners who work in conservation. But the scale is a little bit different here. We're an NGO, and NGOs have their unique challenges. And as such, we have a webcam setup, and we're making it work. Our work is still important, and we will proceed regardless of the technical issues we're having. I think we can still have a productive day. So what I'm talking about this morning has to do with conservation of natural heritage day. So what I'm talking about this morning has to do with conservation of natural heritage. If you're familiar with the JCDT at all, you'll know that the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust is responsible for the management of the Blue and Jonker Mountains National Park. And this was a national park designated in 1993. And it's a protected area which comes with special rules about the use of the space. The overall mission of the JCDT is to advance sustainable development and conservation with a particular focus on the Blue Mountains. And then when we look at the goal of our program area, conservation heritage, it is to maintain and enhance the remaining area of closed and broadleaf disturbed broadleaf forest, and to protect the plant and animal species that exist within the Blue and Jonker Mountains. So if you look at this map to my little left, is some zonation on the eastern section of the island. And on the inside, the darker green, you'll notice the UNESCO World Heritage Site. And that's the most sensitive part of the national park area. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site for outstanding universal value in both natural and cultural heritage. And this was in 2015. The outer area, that's the national park boundary, that's the lighter green. And then that blue area around, encompassing everything, that's what we refer to as our community buffer zone. And this is a 2-kilometer buffer where we actually do most of our work because that's where the people are. These are the people who interact with the natural resources of the space. So what exactly are we conserving? This is a rare tropical cloud. It's very, very unique in this part of the world. It's probably one of 2 cloud forests in the Caribbean, and it's a key biodiversity area, globally recognized for its importance in habitat for biodiversity. Of course, I mentioned before, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. A lot of this is pristine, closed broadleaf forest, meaning undisturbed, meaning nobody has troubled it just yet. And we hope to keep it that way for the most part. We have many varied ecosystem services in this area. So the space is valuable just for the plants and animals and so on. But if we were to look at the human component of it, we acknowledge that it supplies a lot of clean water to the eastern section of the island. 10 of Jamaica's 26 watershed management units can be found intersecting in the Blue Mountains area. We recognize the carbon sequestration value of the space, and we recognize other ecosystem services that support wider industries of agriculture, for example. So I'm leading you through a series of questions, and the first one I want to ask is, how do we conserve the space that we're paying attention to here? And there are 3 main things I want to talk about. One is forest restoration, and then we're looking at the propagation and conservation of threatened trees, and we're looking at boundary defense. So, as stated before, this is a national park area, but it's looking a little bit different now in terms of the colors and the zonations that you see. This is actually a land cover map produced by the Forestry Department, and this one is a bit dated now. I believe this one was produced in 2014-15, but the Forestry Department has actually just recently concluded their new iteration of this assessment and just published it. I believe you can find it on their website at the current moment. Um, Nonetheless, this is a land use cover map that shows the different kinds of cover on the ground within the Blue Mountains. So the dark green in the area is representing that primary broadleaf forest that we hold as valuable. And then these other patches of light green and other colors towards it, the peripheries and edges, these are disturbances. So you'll see secondary forest that's been cleared and probably regenerating. You'll find invasive species. These are plants that have been introduced and are not native to the area that actually threaten local biodiversity, ecosystem biodiversity. And these kinds of areas are the ones that we highlight as problematic. This is how we identify our practice for restoration. So we're looking at degradation within the national park space, and we're trying to see what are the spaces that need some help to get it back up to this level of, as best as possible, primary forest. Sorry, just back 1 second before. So after identifying these priority areas, we do some assessments of the space. So this is our remote sensing technique. And then what we do is ground truthing. So we have to visit the space, look at it, get an idea of the lay of the land, understand what is there, understand what we need to use as our inputs to restore the space. So we'll get an assessment of the existing forest and the adjacent forest, what should be there. And then we start to prepare trees like these. So this is the blue maple here, and this is milkwood there. And both these photos are along the southern boundary here. So we're along here at an area called Exhibition Hill. This is about an area of 35 acres of degraded land. This was historically used for farming, and as land became depleted over time, because we have a very resource extractive type of farming in Jamaica, where soils get depleted and the natural environment is depleted. As these soils and environment have been depleted over many, many years, this area was abandoned and just left to be colonized by invasives. We identified this area and we started planting these trees here in about 2019, 2020, just about then. And to date, we've planted over 5,000 trees in this area. And we've had to do a lot of monitoring and following up just to ensure that it's all going well, and that the trees get the support that they need so that they can be viable and actually restore the forest. So forest restoration is not just tree planting. It's a very comprehensive activity that takes into consideration what was there before, what needs to be there, what are the specific functions of the trees that you're introducing to the space, and ensuring that it all fits well ecologically in terms of use, niche, and function. The next part of what we do in terms of the conservation is propagation and conservation of threatened trees. So there are these threatened trees that we have in Jamaica, mostly designated by that are threatened. And what we've been trying to do is to first off identify where these trees are, mapping the range of the trees, and then trying to figure out how to actually grow them. And when we say growing them, of course, if you're any at all knowledgeable with plant biology, you'll know they reproduce sexually or asexually. And we are looking at sexual ways of reproducing the plants. This is important. And when we say sexual reproduction, we're talking mainly about seeds, getting seeds and being able to plant them out in the nursery and being able to then use those plants for forest restoration. Currently, most of the trees were not able to grow from seeds, and we actually just pick up seedlings from the forest. So while the rangers are on patrol, they will take these seedlings from the forest, repot them in the nursery, have them grow up a bit, and then carry them out to the graded areas for planting. And that's really the inputs for the restoration program. However, you can imagine the inefficiencies with this method because it's just dependent on how many little saplings you can find. Sometimes you find a lot, sometimes you don't find enough. However, if we were able to grow from seeds, you could theoretically collect a lot of seeds, you could store them, and then you could plant them out. And then we could have a lot more trees for forest restoration. A couple of them at Hollywood, and we're doing the monitoring to start the experiments and figure out how exactly to get these trees reproducing or how to assist that process. When sorry, we can just go ahead. Right. So those are the main trees we're focusing on for the threatened trees conservation activities. We are still in the midst of getting a lot of that work done. We have some new help now from Tom. Tom joins us from the UK, and he's an intern who has knowledge and interest in these plants, and he's helping us out for a couple of months, trying to see if he can add his expertise to help us move along with this activity. The next main focus that we've been looking at recently is boundary defense. So one of the things that you will pick up very quickly as you go out in the field and you have to interface with the national park is that you don't actually know where it starts and where it stops. And it might seem simple, but it's a really, really tricky problem. The problem is our rangers will be on patrol and they encounter a farmer, and they say to the farmer, "Hey, sir, you're not allowed to be farming right here. This is the national park." And the farmer says, "No, this is my land. And I've been farming here for the last 5 years. You can't tell me where to be and where not to be." And then there's back and forth, and nobody knows who's right. And that poses a significant challenge in actually protecting the space if you don't know where it is that you're protecting. So one of the things that we've been able to do is to actually equip rangers with the GIS information on their smart devices. So these are live maps that shows the boundaries of the national parks on their phones and tablets and shows where they are in relation to the national park boundary. So they're able to have quick reference of where the boundaries are and actually use that information to enforce the national park regulations. In addition to that support, they have been using this to actually physically mark the boundaries of the national park. So they have these little signs that they'll go up and they'll mount on the trees. It says you're now entering the Blue and Jonquil Mountains National Park, Forest Reserve. You know, these are all the associated rules that come with it so that you can have the space. And that's a simple intervention, but a very, very important intervention. So we've been focusing on a critical area of about 9.5 kilometers. And this image is a bit askew, but you can see most of it. We're looking at Syncona in the west over to Abbey Green in the east. And these blue points are sections with where some of the signs have been mounted to date. This map needs to be updated. Since the last map collection, we've actually gone out and installed more signs along this area. So theoretically, people moving from their communities outside the national park boundary can know where the boundaries actually are as they get closer to the national park. No. All right, so I just want to pause to show you a quick overview of what this looks like. So we have some images here for context. This line here, all right, this is the place I referred to earlier as Exhibition Hill. This line here is actually the park boundary that we've been working to mark. Above it is the national park, and this is where we've been actually planting trees. This footage is from about 2020 when we just started work in the area. What we want to do now is actually update the footage to show like before and after, and actually the progress of the tree growth. So that's something to look forward to. We're not quite done with that activity just yet. Some of the things we want to highlight is just the competing land uses in this space. You can see on the outside of the park is a farming areas, coffee farmers, other kind of farmers, and then on the inside you see where we have historical degradation where we've started planting. Some areas have good forest, but what typically happens is that these farming areas actually encroach into the national park boundary and threaten the trees that are within. So this is the work that we've been doing regarding the boundary and the boundary defense. All right. So again, if you've been with us for some time, you'd have heard me talk about a lot of these initiatives before. This is the constant focus of the JCDT in this period of time. But I just want to give you some updates about where we're at this point and what the results are starting to look like. We're about 2 years into these kinds of activities, and so far we can say that we have over 10,000 trees planted. This is between Exhibition Hill and College Region, as well as community agroforestry projects. So we also work with local communities to have them planting trees. And to date, we have about just over 10,000 trees planted. We have about 50 hectares of land currently being restored. So I don't want to say that the restoration activities have concluded and they are restored, but what I'm saying is that these are the areas that we're currently working on to bring them up and assist them in the restoration process. We have identified about 4 out of the 8 threatened trees, and this is one of the goals that we are fast tracking for the upcoming period because we're really concerned about the progress being made here in terms of actually propagating the trees. So it turns out if the trees are actually threatened, they're very likely to be rare, meaning that it's hard to actually find them. So before we actually get to do any work in terms of experiments and planting and so on, step 1 is to find the tree. Finding the tree is not as simple as it seems. So we're actually trying to get more people out in the field, go to some more targeted areas and seeing if we can get some more visibility on some of these species that we're looking for. We have marked about 8 kilometers of critical boundary area, and we identify these areas as critical because those are the areas that are mostly encroached. We've done assessments to understand the movements in and out of the national park, and we prioritize those areas where we see significant encroachment and significant resource extraction. We have marked a lot of that section. I'd say we're about 90% done with that activity. And we have, of course, over 1,000 boundary marking signs. Whoop, I misspoke. I added a 0 to this figure because I want to inflate the work of JCBT. But it's actually in the scale of hundreds. So we've installed over 100 boundary marking signs in this 9.5 kilometer section. And that's where we are to date. Oh, when you look at that, it's done. All right, so I'm just about 2 minutes over my time, but just if there are any questions from the floor, I'd love to facilitate those at this time. Hopefully people could hear online. If not, the videos a bit later. Sure.
Your
Okay, so the question is about the ownership structure of the land in the buffer zone. So the buffer zone is a 2 kilometer radius area outside from the national park boundary, extending outwards. This is an administrative tool. It's not a legally designated space. In terms of land ownership, it's a mixture. Some of it is private land, some of it is private commercial land in terms of large scale coffee farming and so on, and then some of it is crown land. So probably a significant portion of it is actually crown lands right in the buffer zone around the national park.
So some of this includes over this one.
It is, yes, yes, it is. And of course, we understand, we're all familiar with squatting in an urban context, but if we were to transpose it to this more rural context, we still see a lot of the same similarities, and the issue is as complex as it is in the rural areas. At the core of it, this is a livelihoods issue. This is, where people live, where people can sustain themselves. So we don't take it lightly that we're just pushing people out and forcing them to fend for themselves. The physical work of boundary marking is also paired with outreach and compliance, as well as training activities to encourage alternative livelihoods. So, as we say, don't do this, we're trying to demonstrate a viable alternative to the communities. And that's still a work in progress to figure out those alternative livelihoods, to get them up to the capacity that they need to be at to benefit from their livelihoods, but also to even find land that they can use, to do their farming and so on. So that is work in progress. And you'll hear a little bit more about those kinds of activities when we touch on the socioeconomic side of things. Any other questions? All right, great. Thanks for listening. We're gonna turn over to my colleague Abby Houghton, and yeah, yeah. All right, so we're gonna have Abby going next.
Oh, what you streaming from me?
Okay, good morning again, everyone. I have a little stage fright, so all right. So good morning. So what I'm going to be doing this morning is to just be talking about what we have been doing so far with regards to preservation of cultural heritage within the Blue and Jumper Mountains National Park. So what I will be talking about this morning, I'll be talking about just an overview of what we're doing, you know, what really are we studying, what we have studied, what we have looked at to date, and we're going to be focusing on two main things that we've been doing. That's our work under the IAF funded Foreign Communities Tourism Support Project and our MFD tool that we plan to use to collect information. And also we will be looking at how cultural heritage is linked to natural heritage. After all, today is International Mountain Day, so why are we talking about cultural heritage? Can, alright, so just a quick overview. That is Colonel Latimer and I. That's Cosmo. Yeah, so just a quick overview of what we're doing with regards to cultural heritage. Um, Jamaica is, Jamaica's first and only national park is actually the Blue and Jumper Mountains National Park. And the main aim of the Blue and Jumper, the main aim of this national park is for conservation, right, of wildlife, flora and fauna. In addition to conservation, we also, the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust, we also focus on conservation of cultural heritage along with the conservation agenda, along with conservation of biodiversity. Also, the World Heritage Status designation of the Blue Mountains National Park in 2015 increases the importance of the national park and also means that we need to focus as well on the cultural heritage of the national park. So our national park is an area of importance for both natural and cultural heritage. Okay, so cultural heritage, we have four main objectives under our management plan for studying culture, for just studying cultural heritage within the Blue Mountains National Park, the buffer zone communities. So our first two objectives will look at the tangible and the non-tangible heritage preservation. We're basically looking at what has been retained over the years. Our third objective, we try to promote appreciation for marine heritage and links to natural heritage. How is preserving marine heritage connected to preserving natural heritage, preserving the forest in the mountains where the culture is practiced. And objective four, we aim to promote research that aids in management and preservation. Okay? So some of the things that we have done so far. Right, so under the South Africa Jamaica Research Project, we have done some research into agro-ecosystems and marine culture, and we actually were attempting to do a twinning of our national park, the Ruanda Mountains National Park, with a South African national park, but due to COVID, we were unable to. So this was a very interesting project that we had, looking at the links between farming practices, agroforestry practices, agro-ecosystems, we should say, and how to link to marine culture, right? So you're here in agro-systems, so and marine culture. So what this project really looked at was how conservation was tied to cultural heritage. Why and how retention of cultural heritage preserves biodiversity. And under intangible heritage, some of the things that we've done over the years, um, we have contracted a heritage officer. She's no longer with us, but just going through some of the things that we did in the past. So what she did, she prepared a monitoring and evaluation plan and worked on an educational booklet um, with the aim of collecting the information, the cultural information in the park, and also Jamaica Energy Partners funded Mr. Bliss, and we also participated in Moortown, Charleston, Scotsall events. I'm sure you'll be familiar. If you are, well, are you familiar with these communities? I should ask. Most persons will be familiar with that, right? So, all right, and also the Charleston Marine Conference, we facilitated, participation of a South African researcher and participation in that conference through the South Africa Jamaica Research Projects. What are we doing now? So you see four main things, right? There is a project officer, which is me. We have our programs assistant, which is Mishka. And you're also seeing the Jamaica IF funded project sub grants component, which is under our Marine Communities Tourism project, support project, and you're also seeing cultural M&E too. So basically, what Michigan I have been doing, working with JCDT's management. Sorry. Right. So what Michigan and I have been working on, with JCDT's management, we have been working on developing a tour guide booklet that incorporates a large amount of marine culture in it, and it's in a documented format so that this can contribute to sustainable livelihoods. Right? And Mishka is really the brainchild behind that. She has been working very assiduously on that. And also, we have both been working on the MNU tool, the Cultural Heritage MNU tool, that is in the form of questionnaires that we will administer to community members. I'll talk some more on that in a little. All right, so let's take a closer look first at the IF funded Marine Communities Tourism Support Project. So the main aim of that project is increasing livelihoods, sustainable livelihoods within the community. So the aim is to, under a sub-grant program, the communities, marine communities, within the Blue and Jungle Mountains National Park would implement tour packages in their communities. And a large part of the tour package will include the culture of the communities. So this is a part of what we're packaging. Why are we talking about this on International Mountain Day? We're gonna get there in a little while, but just keep that in mind. Sustainable tourism. Sorry, we're promoting sustainable tourism, which in large part includes maroon culture. And this is where the tour guide booklet that Mishka has been working on, this is where it comes in, where it provides, a physical documented copy of how we package their culture or assist them in packaging their culture to the public. All right. So how do we link this? How are we linking this to conservation? Mountains, forests, right? We know that sustainable tourism and ecotourism create a lower ecological footprint, as opposed to mass tourism. And it also increases the likelihood of better mitigation of environmental impacts. And all of these lead to better conservation. What are some of the next steps that we're thinking under this project in relation to cultural heritage? We are thinking of incorporating or monitoring and evaluation of maroon culture, which I'm going to get in the next slide. We are thinking of incorporating this under a second phase of this project so that we link this programmatic area that we have to our project. Right, to a project that already focuses on maroon culture. So these numbers are not so very important, with the exception of one. Of course, today is International Mountain Day. The theme, is, we're bigging up the women in mountains. All right, we picked up Mishka. All right.
Oh, sorry.
So I highlighted the women, right? The number of women trained in these communities under our project. So we have, although we still have more males participating in these communities, but we still have a good number of females participating. We had a total of 123 females participating in all the activities that we have had so far in the maroon communities, and 111 women were trained. We think it's significant, and of course we have to big up these women in these communities, right? And also in the next slide, so each of these communities have formed groups that will be offering these tour packages to the public, and out of these groups, a total of 5 are led by women. And again, big up to these women taking the lead in conservation and tourism, sustainable tourism. All right, so let's move on. All right, so now we're going to look at the cultural heritage MNU tool. All right, so what's the purpose of us creating M&E tool. The aim really is to collect data on mostly intangible heritage preservation. There are some aspects of tangible heritage that will also be collected by this tool, but it focuses mostly on the intangible. And we link this collection to objectives 3 and 4. The aim of us collecting all this information is we want to increase appreciation for Maroon heritage, and also we want to attract research, right, to these communities to further study ways that we can help to retain Maroon culture in the Luanjanku Mountains, right? So the aim of the monitoring and evaluation tool, we want to monitor the Maroon culture. We want to identify trends. How do they practice the culture? How often is it practiced? How important is it to them? And not only the frequency, but how well is the entire community represented? Is it just like the two persons who are always, practicing the culture in the community, or is it a larger, a wider cross section of the community? Okay. All right. So we're gonna look at just two papers. There's quite a few papers that have been written about. There is a time crunch. I'm gonna just focus on two. All right. So the first paper, and this was written by Donovan Campbell, and I have it out. Quite a few others. The title of that paper is Wild Food Harvest, Food Security, Biodiversity Conservation in Jamaica. And the study was focused on the Millbank farming community in the Rio Grande Valley. And one of the things that they found was that wild food cultivation in Millbank, in the Rio Grande Valley in general, was high. What do we mean by wild food cultivation? It's simply as it sounds. The food grows in the wild. Sometimes it grows on older farms that were maybe abandoned, and they just allow the food to grow without use of pesticides or any other chemicals to aid in the growth of the food. Why are we talking about planting in the wild? Can you go to the next slide? Why are we talking about growing plants in the wild? How is this related at all to conservation of forests? Well, as you can see on the screen, it says forest areas where food is harvested, that is wild grown food, right? Wild food harvest, right? They're not actively managed, right? So there is no threat to the forest. There is no slash and burn. There are no chemicals, right? So leaching into the soil and so on. So this in itself is what helps to conserve or prevent deterioration of the forest, as opposed to actively farming the land where you have to clear the land, use a lot of chemicals and so on. So this was one of the links. This was one of the papers that clearly linked um, agroforestry practices in a maroon community, right, to conservation. And we are interested in this because the agroforestry practice is a remnant of maroon culture that they practice, right? Growing food in the wild. Previous slide, please. Thank you. All right, so here's another paper. This is a dissertation that was done by Ms. Ellis Palmer on an assessment of land management strategies and resilience capacity of communities within the Blue and Junco Mountains National, sorry, Blue and Junco Mountains Protected Area, right? And what her dissertation focused on was land management strategies and resilience of farming communities around the socio-ecological system of the Blue and Junco Mountains National Park. Next slide, please. And basically, what she found in her, as she did her dissertation, was that these communities have unique socio-ecological characteristics that benefit biodiversity, conservation, and social progress. And this was specifically through these communities' agroforestry practices, again, which are remnants of maroon culture or aspects, I should say,
of maroon culture. So this is well documented. There's a whole lot of information out there on the link between agroforestry in farming communities and conservation. And again, agroforestry practices in these communities, maroon communities, are from maroon culture that's been passed on. So, you know, what I have here is just a picture. What is the of everything I've been saying so far with International Mountain Day? Cultural heritage goes hand in hand with natural heritage. How? The practices that have been retained by the Maroons over the years help in conservation of forests, right? And how is this related to International Mountain Day? Our mountains, for example, the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park, host a wide, a large, cross section of our biodiversity. So preserving cultural heritage preserves conservation. Okay, so let's quickly go through what we're collecting with our monitoring and evaluation tool. Some of the information we're collecting, such as include governance and hierarchy. Is it still done in the Maroon? What we really want to know is it still done in the Maroon way, or has it changed? Is it different? Right? The cuisine, the music and festivals, clothing, the museum, relics, artifacts, craft, medicine, language and storytelling, what is still considered as cultural and sacred sites, and very importantly, the next generation. Right? The aim of us monitoring cultural heritage is, are the children learning it? Is it being passed on to them? Are they going to teach it to their children? So that part of the tool is so very important. And of course, farming practices and environmental knowledge. We're also planning to collect that information because we believe that this is closely linked with maroon culture. Right? So what I just have here on the screen is I just did a quick summary of what we know so far, right? So we know that the culture is alive and well, especially in communities like Charleston, Scotts Hall, Morton. Right? So I'm not gonna bore you with all of this. I'm gonna move on. Alright, so just a little on environmental knowledge. A CAP survey was done, and you're going to be hearing a little bit more, a lot more, I should say, about it. Right? It was done to measure the environmental changes and problems within the community. Sorry, to compare the participants, knowledge of environmental changes and problems within the community, and just to see what their awareness and interaction with JCBT staff and farming practices, just to see some of the farming practices that they use, that they practice. So some of the environmental issues that we found that they cared about was nature, deforestation, landslides, availability of fresh water, river poisoning. I'm sure you will have heard of some of these terms, river poisoning, and so on. So I don't want to go too much in depth in this because Kendra is going to talk a lot more about it. So, and I know time is going. So, alright. So, thank you for everyone.
Any questions for Albert? Yeah. All right, so thanks for sticking with us so far. We are gonna switch over to a virtual presentation, so that's gonna take us like 5 minutes. So feel free to just break for coffee, and we'll restart in 5 minutes. Let's remix it. Yeah.
areas and management agencies that consider local communities' socioeconomic well-being within their conservation plans actually have higher conservation success rates and better ecosystem health. However, it's not easy. It can be a challenge. It can be a challenge, but it's also possible and can be very rewarding. These are just some examples of the questions that were included in the surveys, and these are the ones that I focused in on my thesis research. So there were also demographic questions like age, education, and community. The survey asked questions such as these. The first 2 points: have you heard of the national park, of the Jamaica Conservation and Development Trust? Have you seen a ranger in your community? Have you spoken to a ranger? These are asking about participants' experiences and interactions with the park. I focused on were environmental attitudes in which participants were asked to rate how they felt about different environmental actions such as deforestation, slash and burn, and tree cutting. And finally, the trees: how many trees have the participants cut down, and does the participant practice slash and burn? And I think something that's important to acknowledge is that as a researcher, I was not told any specifics or anecdotal information about the nonprofits or about JCDT's projects. And this was with the objective that I would data objectively, and I wasn't going to come in with the same knowledge. And I'm able to provide information to stakeholders that that everyone can then analyze with their own knowledge. What influences a community's environmental attitudes and behaviors? I'm going to start in sex or gender. That these can influence participants or a community's attitude or behavior, but the details vary by study. So it's younger or older, male or female. It all typically depends on the culture. Higher education or a level or higher level of health is also correlated with more positive environmental perception. Yes, sometimes because of academic knowledge, but more often because those who have a higher education level or higher wealth have less. Their work is less dependent on the natural resources. Looking at geographic region and the distance from protected areas, lesser distance from the protected area has been shown to have a more positive relationship with the protected area or its management agency, because those are reliant or connected with the protected area and its natural. While some of these variables look very simple if we're doing a statistical test, it's very important to understand that these variables depend on context and could very well be interrelated. I'll give you an example. Let's say a survey participant has an attitude about the national park, and perhaps this is because they had a bad experience with a park ranger after receiving a sanction for cutting wood within that protected area. But they needed this firewood this wood to use as firewood for their home. So it's very important to understand and speak to the community to really understand what is influencing them and how to best approach conservation with and not against local stakeholders. My task, my thesis, was to analyze the survey data statistically and to provide feedback of the survey and its results as an outsider, without having known the national park, its communities, and really only the bare minimum about its management agency, JCDT, and its work. The information that I received was all from publications and nothing was really anecdotal. And this was to offer more objective findings that advocates and neighbors of the national park can use. I chose to focus in on geographic regions because JCDT in the national park know what different regions they've worked in, and more of the nuances of these communities and their outreach there. And so this was a way of me providing statistical data to then complement their more anecdotal, their more personal, qualitative information or knowledge. My 3 study questions are as follows, and I'm going to skip through a lot of the statistics today. I'm happy to discuss this at a later time. I'll be focusing on the results and a little bit of the analysis. The 3 study questions are: do environmental attitudes or behaviors vary between geographic regions? Which demographic or experiential variables are most correlated with these attitudes and behaviors? And do participant environmental attitudes and reported behaviors align? If anyone's curious, all data was cleaned, organized, analyzed, and graphed with RStudio, which is a coding program. For my statistical analysis, I used a total of 1,323 of the surveys. There was just a little bit of data cleaning that I needed to do. I removed those who were under the age of 18. And this map shows how we divided up the regions, how we divided the communities into regions. Because there's no publication that talks about the nuances of the differences between communities in this area, I relied on the help of GCDT and my thesis chair, who has quite a lot of experience in this area, has traveled in this area, and they helped me make these groups for looking, for example, to think about how they were grouped. If we look at the corridor, which are marking the communities with the gray dots, the B1 corridor is typically following that major highway that goes down into Kingston. These are just a few examples of the data that I pulled from this, how they can be organized by region. So here we're seeing participant education level. Has the participant heard of the national park? And does the participant practice slash and burn? I have these graphs and more that JCDT will have them, and we will also hopefully share them with those who are interested. And I think, like all of the findings in my thesis, these are all really good starts of conversation. So, because on the first question, do environmental attitudes vary by geographic region? This slide is just to show that I first had to see if there was an association between attitude and geographic region. Ethical test said yes, we can use region, where a participant lives, to predict what their attitude is going to be. How are they going to feel about deforestation, soil erosion and landslides, or forest fires? So let's look at a little bit at these graphs. How do these regions differ and how are they similar? If we look at the first one on the left, river pollution, we're seeing that, I guess they're for all of them. Let's focus on river pollution, so we're all looking at the same one. We see that most participants are responding between 1 and 2, which is that they think that river pollution is very bad or bad. We see this across the board. We're seeing this with all 3 questions. No one is saying very good, even neutral. We're also seeing a trend that the eastern foothills and the northern foothills have lower responses. However, there's not a huge range in responses. If we're looking at slash and burn, when I did the statistical test for slash and burn, there was less of a correlation or less of a connection between participant region and their attitudes about slash and burn. And I think this is an important thing to consider when we think about what are that many individuals in these communities depend on subsistence farming, which includes slash and burn. So it's possible that there's another variable that affects these responses, or there's a more complex relationship with the activity. Let's look at the second two graphs, deforestation and cutting down of trees. If we think about deforestation, it is the destruction of a forest. Cutting down trees can, in a way, be just one small step to getting to deforestation. However, we're seeing some different responses. One, cutting down trees in general has a higher, a more positive attitude. If we're looking at the base 1.6, we're maybe between halfway between very bad and bad, is the lowest score, past two or past bad. So people are more positive in general about cutting down trees than they are about deforestation. There's also a lot more overlap between these communities, and these are important considerations. One, for wording in a survey for next time, is this something that is important to understand? But also understanding what are community members' relationships with the concept of deforestation and cutting down a tree, and understanding that many individuals may cut down trees because that is part of their everyday life, or how they are interacting with their natural resources. And while this can be seen as a negative, this also can be seen as an opportunity of how to find more ecologically friendly ways of interacting with the natural resources. This is just food for thought. The second question, do environmental behaviors vary by geographic regions? I did the same test to see if we could predict participants' behavior by their region, and no, we could not. I would have loved to say yes, it would have been such a clean way of doing it. We did find that participant sex or participant gender is more correlated. I would like to talk about that for one moment. It's not a strong correlation, but I think that these publications that have been written in the past have some interesting points. So in past studies in which one gender is more supportive of conservation, it suggests that difference is influenced by culture and gender roles. To give you an example, one study concluded that women were more likely to support conservation actions because their livelihoods were more linked to the ecosystem's health. So thinking about the men and women around the Blue and John Crow Mountains National Park, they may also have different gender roles and activities within their communities that impact their environmental attitudes and actions. The second statistical test I ran took these 7 variables in those 2 columns and sought to find what combination of these variables best explains participants' attitudes and behaviors. And out of the 7 variables for attitude, it found 4. Out of behaviors, it found 3. So again, I was not very satisfied because I would like it to be a very clear response. However, returning to that same conclusion of how complex communities are, and that this statistical analysis might be implying, meaning that perhaps there is not a relation between these 4 or 3 variables, but perhaps causation or another similarity between the variables that are making this the result. However, despite there not being a strong message on that first test, I would just like to show you that I did make some graphs that I'm going to share with JCDT, and I think this is an important thing just to show that there are different ways of looking at different ways of looking at the community's responses. So I'm just showing this now so it can be a conversation for the future. Last question was participant environmental attitudes and reported behaviors align. To read these to the right on the x-axis. And the statistical test that I did for this found that no, attitudes do not align with behaviors at all. And this actually follows what other past studies have found, that attitudes do not always align with behavior. So we think, so in past studies, when participants were expressing their interest in environmental conservation, it was overshadowed by the priorities of the individual and the community, such as poverty and jobs, sickness, children's education, political corruption. So suddenly, conservation was no longer a priority. Natural resources scores because they are more connected resources and they're seeing what's happening, but they also use slash and burn or tree cutting in their work. Again, we know now that there's no relationship between attitude and behaviors, but these graphs can show us some interesting things that can be our future conversation. So how do these findings help the JCDT and the national park? First, I provided just basic demographics and experiences, different ways of looking at this data, also quantifying the environmental attitudes and behaviors. We found it can be predicted by region, behavior not as much, which indicates that communities are complex, or can be concluded. Participant attitudes are not aligned with behaviors, and multiple variables can explain responses. So for me, as a conclusion, while statistics and quantitative data may help simplify something, it's also important to consider the complex human history and ecosystems within. These are just a few recommendations. I'm just going to talk about a few. So first, sharing findings with the community and stakeholders, a little bit about like what I'm doing today. But it's also important to show that transparency with the community and that follow through. So we asked something from the community, now we are going to show them what we did with what we asked them. And like I said before, it's also start of a conversation, sharing with other stakeholders, sharing with the community is a good way of starting to ask the question and share in these questions what is happening and why is this happening? Why is this happening in the communities? Of course, we can always do more survey analysis, but first it's good to do a little adjustment to surveys just with lessons learned. My last two very general recommendations are to focus the survey on current indicators that the nonprofit or the park has in place. This is a good way of, one, simplifying work, and focusing the survey on what we want to see. What are our goals as an organization? And with that, the last point, I recommend having a pluralistic way of monitoring and evaluating. So if this survey is done, say, every 5 years, it's gathering quantitative information. Why not also do qualitative? So doing interviews or anecdotal narratives, which is going to provide a more holistic view of communities, the relationship with the national park and the organization's work. So there we go. Just a last few notes. It is possible to find a win-win solution between communities and ecosystems. This is a challenge for conservation organizations, but fortunately, there are also many excellent existing examples around the world. It's not a simple solution that we can apply to every situation. However, it is, I guess a challenge is a good word for it. It's necessary to adapt to the specific context of a community or a group or an ecosystem. It also requires constantly reevaluation, and the stakeholders around this important national park have this amazing opportunity to integrate traditional knowledge into modern conservation strategies. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kendra. Really appreciated your presentation. Right now, we're just gonna take any questions from the floor. If anybody's interested in asking anything about what Kendra said here this morning, we have one question, Kendra.
Um, uh, Kendra mentioned a few times that communities are complex. So I'm just wondering how uh, how one tackle. I mean, are there things in common with every community? I didn't quite get that. Whether where to start with working with communities, have whether to deal with each community on one at a time, or whether to find something that's in common with all the communities that you can start working on, and what strategy would you suggest?
Sure. Thank you for that question, Emma. I'm just going to summarize it for Kendra since I'm closer to the mic. So Emma is asking about the complexity of the communities. She would like to know if there are any common threads among the communities that we could use as a starting place in terms of reaching out to them and to manage the relationships and the national park. Or is it that the communities are so different that we have to deal with each of them on a different level? Can you just share what you think the data is showing us, Kendra?
Wow, Emma, thank you for that question. That's quite a challenging question, and I wish I had an amazing answer for that amazing question. My first response is this survey has a lot more to show us about the communities and the differences. One of the conclusions that this data shows is that while attitudes are somewhat different, it seems like reported behaviors are very similar throughout the areas. And I think that's an important thing for JCDT and other stakeholders to consider are perhaps people know different amounts or feel slightly different about these different environmental actions such as deforestation, but it seems like people are slashing and burning and cutting down trees more or less at the same rate. So I think that's an interesting starting point.
Thanks for that answer, Kendra. So we really appreciate work like this because as conservation practitioners, we tend to have an and we don't necessarily get to pause to do the analysis that we need to do. And this data is really, really important in helping us to confirm some of the things that we think might be going on, or to even dispel some of the notions that we might have interpreted about the communities. So what we want to do now is to be able to incorporate these insights into our management approach and what we do here at JCDT. So, for example, this is really important to understand what are the limits of JCDT actions and what should the specific conservation approach be. Are these mitigating factors like poverty, like livelihoods, and and so on? How do we contend with those issues when conservation is not that much of a priority within the countries? Can we make a link? Is there any option, any possible paths there? So it's definitely a lot to think about, and we want to thank Kendra again for assisting us, and we hope to work with her some more in the future. Thanks again, Kendra.
An amazing experience. And I think Chatham University as a university is very interested in continuing this partnership in many different ways. So this is a very neat experience to have shared, and thank you very much.
Okay, that is just switching over to the final presentation, and then we will be wrapping up with that. I just wanted to add with respect to next steps in terms of better understanding the communities, because they're about between 40 to 50 within a 2 kilometer boundary, within 2 kilometers of the national park boundary, so 2 kilometers out from the boundary. That's our focus. They're not living in the national park. Most of these community members are not even farming within the national park. That area that David showed is just a particular location on the southern slopes. But it is a growing issue, particularly as the communities are finding that the land that they normally farm closer to the communities are degrading because, of course, of inappropriate farming practices. So they are tending towards heading up the mountains. We had the concern, and even more so now with Kendra's analysis, we had the concern that community members would be saying, oh yes, we are concerned about deforestation. Yes, we're concerned about something to do, river poisoning or garbage pollution. But then you go to the community and people are still doing all of those activities. So you have the challenge that you're doing this environmental education, you're raising awareness and knowledge, but the behavior is not happening. So we have a survey that should start early next year to look at the issue of behaviors and what is really what are the things that we need to do to change behavior. We suspect we know what a lot of those are. We believe that some of it is related to poverty and lack of socioeconomic opportunities. It's also related to cultural practices that this is the way people have always done this activity, and it wasn't a problem in the past, mainly because maybe there weren't so many people in these areas. There weren't so many people farming. We also believe that one of the challenges in our mountain communities is that there is not enough mentoring of these youths in terms of, okay, so I'm a farmer and maybe you give me a 1-day training workshop on how to carry out my farming in a more environmentally friendly manner. And I'm like, oh yes, this is great. And I get my tree seedlings and I take them home and I'm going to plant them. I've learned how to. That we get in most communities when we have workshops is very positive. But again, the reality on the ground is different. One of the things is that in many of these communities, they do not have any, agricultural extension workers actually visiting in their communities. And even sometimes, some of the things that they are being told are not necessarily so environmentally friendly. So we believe that the farmers need more hands-on approaches, more checks and more monitoring to encourage them to carry out their activities, for example. And you're like, okay, great. But if we check it back next week, you're back to using the same thing that you've always done because you can't remember what the person showed you. So you do need somebody to come out onto your farm every now and again and check up and see how you're doing. So we'll be looking at that, and then I think David is ready now just to share a bit about monitoring activities now and into the future.
One second.
So may I ask a question, Susan? The raw that people don't come out to these farm communities and
in a limited way, and it tends to be during projects. So like was responsible for this large national project.
No,
Yalla's whole watershed management.
Yeah,
A lot
yeah.
of activities and a lot of things.
Do that again.
But our concern is that it takes one.
Yeah.
So when the project, and we have that challenge, as and the reality is, the behavioral change like healthy lifestyles, eating right, and so on,
Right.
need that constant.
Yes.
work.
Kind of reinforcement of,
All right, so we're going to wrap up the presentations today by taking a look at monitoring of natural resources. One of the main program areas of the JCDT is a program area called monitoring and evaluation. And what that is about is understanding the impacts of the activities that are taking place. So we do conservation activities. We want to understand what kind of impacts they're actually having on conservation outcomes. This is often a neglected part of the process, and we want to improve our capacity to make that link a little bit better. So let's look at what we're doing. The stated goal of this program area is to track and record both the threats and changes to the ecosystem health so that it is possible to assess whether or not the Blue and Jump Mountains National Park is achieving its overall conservation goal. So whatever it is that we do as activities is supposed to support this overall conservation goal of the Blue Mountains. The M&E program area is asking us, is it working or is it not working? I want to share with you a bit of the activities that we do as a part of our monitoring program. So we have a core of 7 rangers, including their supervisor, and his title is Chief of Corps. He's the Chief of Corps of the National Park Rangers. And what these guys do is that they patrol the extent of the national park, 41,000 hectares of national park, as well as the surrounding communities in the buffer zone. And as they patrol, they're achieving a number of functions. They're looking out to make observations on the environment, but they're also interacting with people and encouraging compliance and doing outreach activities as well. Some of the other activities include freshwater sampling, where they would take water samples from streams, carry it back to the lab, and assess the health of the streams in these areas. Several presentations earlier alluded to the significance of this area for water, so it pays special attention to the water. Bird monitoring is also very important to us, and we think of bird monitoring as a biomonitoring strategy. We're not looking at birds just because they're pretty, although they are very exciting and pretty. You should come out into the mountains sometime to look at the birds. But what bird monitoring allows us to do is to make some conclusions about the health of the overall ecosystem. What we find is that the birds and the bird populations are linked inextricably to the health of the habitats. So if we're seeing declines in key bird populations, that's an early indicator that something is wrong in the environment and we need to take a better look at what is going on. So we pay special attention to the birds. There's also the Jamaican putia, that's Jamaican land mammal, aka the coney, and it has a very restricted habitat range. It is found in maybe like 2, 3 places, regions in the island, one of which is the wet limestone forests of the Portland side of the Blue Mountains, Blue and Champlain Mountains. And this animal is the little one that you see in the cage here. They're hunted from time to time by local people, and you will have seen some images in prior presentations of the animal. So here's an example of a ranger carrying out enforcement and compliance activity. He has intercepted a local community resident who just came back from his fields and actually think he went out to hunt. did go out to hunt the pony. So he has a cage and everything. This is not our cage. This is a cage as seized from this person. So they went out to hunt the pony, and the rangers intercepted them, and this is what they got. And the dialogue went a little like, "Sir, you're not supposed to have this," and the guy was very confused. He didn't know that this was a protected animal. He wasn't combative in any way. He just said, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand." So the rangers were able to explain and educate, but also to take the animal and rehabilitate it. We do a lot of movements around the area. So this small inset of a map is showing you national park boundary in blue, but also the paths that rangers take in and around the space and the kind of environmental observations they're seeing, whether it's logging or solid waste issues, etc. They're also making notes of what are the issues they're seeing per community. This image isn't great at the moment, but it's just some graphics about the frequency of visits per community and the frequency of issues. So this pie chart will be showing the distribution of environmental breaches inside and outside of the national park. When we get this information, it all goes into a central data system, and the rangers are now logging this information remotely. So they have phones and tablets. They're making observations. They're writing down where they're making observations. They're tagging the coordinates. They're making notes on environmental breaches and very, very detailed patrol reports in a remote fashion. Once they hit submit on this, it goes into our database and we're able to visualize the data that is coming from the field. So on the right here, I don't know if you can click the, oops, let me just, there you go, just come across and hit that play button. Right, so on the right or left, depending on where you are, you'll see a dashboard showing the areas that we are at and the types of information that's coming into the reporting system. So these circles are the locations, and the size of the circles are proportional to the number of people that the rangers would have engaged on that particular trip. And the colors of the circles mean different things. It might indicate an environmental breach where somebody's cutting down a tree, or it might indicate another issue with solid waste management or something like that. So these are the kind of tools that we use to make sense of the information that's coming into the reporting system. We also try to understand the ecosystem threats to the ecosystem from other perspectives apart from physical observations of the space. As mentioned before, we use some remote sensing techniques to look at the land cover to see which areas are threatened, but also we're piloting some other techniques that involve sensing of the atmosphere to detect forest fires. So we did some tests which are successful, and we have this mobile application that's able to give us readouts on temperature, that's atmospheric temperature, humidity, and now total volatile organic compounds. So these are some of the things that we are planning to sense in the atmosphere to give us an idea of what's going on the ground, especially in places that might be a little bit harder to reach. Just some more visuals in terms of the bird monitoring activities. These are some of the key sites where rangers would have been conducting their bird surveys. And they would choose different kinds of environments. So some sample points are representative of good forest quality. So we can have a kind of reference point to understand like what's happening in a good forest. And then we might compare that to a degraded area, degraded section of forest to see what the differences are. Just some images as well of water monitoring. The bird monitoring activities at JCDT have been long-standing. However, we are trying to modernize the approach to bird monitoring. Typically, the bird surveys have been done using pen or pencil, clipboard, paper, that kind of thing. But there's some lovely tools coming on stream these days, and one of those tools is the eBird mobile app. eBird is an application where rangers can make note of the observations in terms of birding. This is really good, and it's also good because we now have the specific protocols that we follow within the application. It's not just logging a bird; it's logging a bird as defined by the specific steps, methodology, and criteria. So we're able to do that all within eBird. Also, we are partnering with Birds Caribbean to install a motor station at Hollywood. And it will be, I don't want to misspeak, but it should be the first in the, uh, maybe?
In the island, yeah.
I think it's the first in the island. I think it'll be the
Yeah.
first in the island.
Yeah, there's someone on the island.
Right. So I know they just put up one in Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
Right.
Barbados.
And Barbados, and we're now gonna have the first one at Hollywood. And just in case you're not as excited as Emma, because Emma is an avid birder, I'll explain a little bit about what this actually means. The MOTOS technology is a cellular network tracking technology that allows us to track birds physically in terms of flight path. So what we'll be doing is having this tower at Hollywood, and then we'll set up what is called a banding station, where we capture birds as gently as possible, and we affix a little tag to their legs, and this tag communicates with the tower. And then we release the birds back out, send them on their way. They don't even notice there's something on their leg. And when the birds come within range of this tower, it picks them up and it shows where they're going and where they're coming from. This is really important, especially to assess migratory patterns. So one of the things we haven't been able to assess really well is which kinds of habitats and which kinds of habitats do we need to really for particular migrants. Those are some of the important research answer, and this technology will assist us in getting that done. Of course, I spoke about the data analysis and tools that we're using before, but the overall thesis of um, the, the data analysis activity is one, what are the insights from data that we can get for management decisions? That's one main question. And then all these fancy things, lines and whatever other kind of representation, they're simply tools that help us to interpret what is going on in the environment. So we don't want a situation where we're collecting data and it sits somewhere and we actually don't use it to influence what we're doing on the ground. That's what we're trying to shy away from. So this snippet of a graph, for example, and I cut off the axes by accident, but I'm gonna make up something to tell you so that it makes sense. The green over here is the frequency of patrols over time for a particular year. And then the blue here is the frequency of environmental breaches. So these kind of things, just at a glance, even without statistical analysis just yet, can give us some kind of indication of what is the relation between our effort in terms of finding the breaches and the actual breaches. Also, is there some kind of pattern that we need to pay attention in terms of time of year and environmental breaches? And if we break this out a little bit further, we should be able to see what is actually happening in terms of the time of year. So is it that we're seeing more instances of river pollution versus illegal bird hunting, for example? Those are the kind of analyses that we need to take into consideration so that we can better target our efforts. We have very, very limited resources and we can't just be out in the field just because. We have to be able to say, for example, we know that August is a hot time for bird shooting, illegal, and we need to dedicate our resources towards curtailing that activity. The last main idea I want to share in regards to monitoring has to do with closing the loop. What I have here is a schematic that shows three tiers. And these are tiers of activities as it relates to conservation. The tiers are divided into implementation activities, outcomes activities, and effect activities. So let me give you some examples. In terms of implementation, some of these activities from a JCBT perspective might be hosting a community workshop. We meet with these stakeholders, we do a training, we teach them how to be tour guides, or we teach them sustainable farming practices. That's the implementation phase of activities. When we're looking at outcomes, we want to see, for example, does that training activity that we conducted in that community lead to improved understanding? Are the participants in that workshop, do they have any improved understanding of the issues that we're sharing with them? Is there a reduced threat to the conservation targets, for example? Those are the outcomes level. And then at the core level, I would say is the effect. What is the effect of this improved understanding on the conservation or the health of the ecosystem itself? Can we make a link to say that hosting this workshop will then lead to a reduction in illegal logging, for example? What we want to be able to do is make that link and understand which activities will lead to improved conservation. So we don't want to just do activities just because we think it's the right thing to do or somebody told us to do it. We want to be able to demonstrate and understand how it will affect conservation goals. On the other side, we have this cycle, and we talk about it a lot. We refer to it as the adaptive management cycle. And in other words, it just means learning by doing, where you determine what it is that you want to do, you want to achieve. You design a strategy. Say you want to stop illegal tree cutting, say you're going to do some patrols. You plan those activities and then you go out and do the patrol. You collect the information, and you come back to the office, we look at the information and we evaluate. We say that we conducted 10 patrols and these 10 patrols yielded these results, or they didn't yield these results. Therefore, we may have to adjust our strategies. We think that patrolling from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. is an ineffective strategy because maybe the people who are doing these activities are doing it in the night. Therefore, we adjust our strategy to probably go from 6 p.m. to 12 p.m., for example. That evaluation step is really important in refining the approach and actually getting closer to achieving the goals that we want to achieve. And it's the same way that we're trying to think in terms of our activities at JCBT. We want to be able to use all this data, use all this information, outcomes demonstrably. I at the end of the year that yes, we did 100 patrols, we did this and we did that, but we don't actually understand or know what is happening in the environment and if these things actually helping to improve the environment. So that's where we are in terms of our thinking, in terms of monitoring. And I just went through some of the strategies that we will be using to improve our monitoring capacity. And then a big part of it is also research to tighten up these links. You heard from Kendra earlier, who helped us to understand the socioeconomics. We'll be doing some more socioeconomic research, and we'll be doing other research to help us in our monitoring. Also, there's vast opportunity for graduate students, undergrads, other kinds of interested people to partner with us to get some of these things done. So if you have a particular interest, please reach out to us and we can work together to get this done. And that is the end of the activities, the presentations for today. Just want to know if there are any questions. And at the same time, I just want to show some of the sponsors who have been assisting us with these activities. Question from
I, no one has mentioned this morning at all the impact of climate change on the car. I don't know if that's something that you would monitor along the way, or whether you're noticing changes even when you're doing like tree planting, for example.
Sure.
You know,
Okay. Yeah. So
soil and temperature. Well, you did mention.
I'm gonna answer Emma's question. But I just want to take a minute to acknowledge our sponsors, our major sponsors. That's the Biopharma Program, the Franklin Foundation, the EU. We also have other support from the Neotropical Migratory Birds Act via the American Birds Conservancy. We have partners with Birds Caribbean as well, and major support as well from the Sandals Foundation. They've been supporting our tree planting activities as well. Uh, yep. I hope it's, yeah. We'll come back to the sponsors as well to ensure that everybody's included. But these are the main sponsors. So to tackle the climate change question, it's actually one we get fairly often, and I feel like as conservation practitioners we tend to overlook it or take it for granted because climate change is actually built into everything that we do in terms of conservation. But in terms of the specifics of like what are the climate change observation impacts and strategies, um, there's this interesting paper just released earlier this year by Tanner et al. And a few other names, Bellingham, I believe. Um, they have long-term plots in the Blue Mountains that have been set up since the 70s, I believe. These are plots that vary in size and pretty much they go back periodically and measure the forest structure, measure how the trees grow, and just do an overall assessment of these areas. It's a longitudinal study that's been happening from then till now. Their recent publication coming out of that work introduces us to a term called thermophilization. And I hesitate on that one because I probably got it wrong. So somebody please check me on that and just do a quick Google search. But that term refers to the heating of the forest and how that impacts the forest structure. And what we're seeing coming out of that research is that the forest structure is actually changing due to heating. And we're looking at migration of forest types up the mountain slopes as it gets warmer because the colder areas will increase in elevation and the elevation range for that particular kind of forest that we're used to will become decreased is what is being postulated in this work here. But definitely don't take my word for it. Please go and check out that research. Um, I'll find a link somewhere soon and share the exact reference. But that's one really tangible impact of climate change. Of course, anecdotally, rangers who have been here for 20, 30 years, even, they say to me like the environment is very different from when I just started out. And, places like Milbank, even though we think of it as wet, they say it used to be much more rainy, and it's strange to have a drought period in Milbank. It's strange to have certain kind of weather patterns in these areas. So we will pay attention to the statistical approaches, but also to the qualitative and anecdotal pieces of data. Those are important as well in putting together the whole picture. Um, I must say, however, climate change monitoring is one of our weaknesses in terms of getting the measurements on a fine scale. Right, exactly. What happens typically in Jamaica is that the weather data is collected through the Meteorological Service or another big agency, and they might have weather stations far apart over big regions. But when you get on a micro scale, for example, in the Blue Mountains, the north side of the mountain is different from the south side of the mountain. There are lots of different microclimates, and we don't understand how the overall trend impacts the microclimates. And we want to be able to sense on that scale to get a better idea of what's going on. So really appreciate that question about climate change. And just gonna take one more.
Another thing you mentioned technology.
Yeah.
You mentioned different things like the more but I know that's here.
So connectivity content. Right. Yeah. Okay. So the question is about connectivity in these remote parts of the mountain, and to what extent can we actually monitor remotely given the challenges with connectivity? I'll answer that in two parts. One part has to do with actual remote sensing from satellites. So if we use that approach, and it's getting better day by day, and we can get a lot of information out of it now. If we use that approach, it's not an issue with connectivity because satellites are up here, they have their own connection and whatnot, and we just get the data. The other part of it, yes, if we are to have field instruments that are connected in some way, usually via the internet, there's a challenge because these areas are very remote, there's not the internet infrastructure to support them. However, there is a really interesting new technology called LoRa, and that's an acronym. Oh man, you're putting me on the spot here. Um, but LoRa is an acronym for long range something modulation. What it means is there is a particular bandwidth that we can exploit to send communication from these devices that won't take up a lot of power, and it doesn't rely on the internet. So we did field tests at Halliwell. Um, I'm just gonna open up the other presentation to show you. One second. We did. Here it is. Just very crudely and quickly showing you something here. We did field tests at Halliwell with this kind of technology, and this is a really small map, but I'll just explain what it means. We set up a starting point for sensing some data, and the data was a fire. So we just used one of the fireplaces, started a fire. We put one of these nodes close to the fire, and then we put a relay node maybe 100 meters away. And then we walked along the trails with the receiver node, all along the trails, deep into the forest on the north side, on the south side, all over. And we were still able to pick up the signal all around Hollywood, over a wide area. I think the greatest distance we've covered so far is about 2.5 kilometers. To the point now where we've been able to set up at Exhibition Hill, and overlooking from Exhibition Hill is the Penline Castle school, and I can see it when I'm up there. And we did a test where we stayed up on the hill. We got somebody to drive around and actually receive the data from the hill. So this is I think a really revolutionary change in the technology available to us, where you don't necessarily need a SIM card to get data connectivity. You don't have to set up to the internet, and it works. So what we're able to pick up is small packets of data that tell us about either the humidity or the air temperature or the organic compounds or even the soil moisture. And once we're able to relay that to the school then is now responsible for sending it long distances because we can't do like 10, 20 kilometers. Once we're able to get it to the school, we can then upload to the internet and then get it to the office. So those are some of the breakthroughs that we've been having in technology that allow us to circumvent those gaps in connectivity. So really important, check out LoRa. It will have some really good applications for a lot of the things we're trying to do here in Jamaica. Yeah. All right, so I think that's it. I'm not sure if anybody else has a question, but I don't want to delay too long. Um, I'll turn over to the.
Let me ask you something. This bird monitoring um, tower,
Mhm.
that you're putting, is there any consideration for putting others? There is, let me tell you why I asked the question. We know that migratory birds come to the little keys in the harbor
Mhm.
on a regular basis. And they mainly come from North America, and then they come down around about October, November, that kind of region. They stay till about May, lay eggs, whatever, and then fly back.
Mm.
But I don't know to what extent that has been seriously monitored by any scientific method.
Okay.
Now the question is, how could we link something like
The possibility to have more towers. It's really a question about funding and resources. It's just a resource availability issue.
what kind of resource, what kind of
Money.
what
So,
kind of money we're talking about?
oof, I would have to get back to you on the numbers, the specific numbers for the cost of the project and the cost of the equipment. I have an equipment list, but I don't have the cost off the top of my head. So that is one of the concerns when it comes to motors. Um,
I could find out and let you know because
you're part of the network.
Caribbean we're trying to promote
Yes.
right across the
All right, let's check it out, because I think it's important, and we need to identify some links or things like that.
It's also about partnerships.
Yeah.
So we have a good partnership with Birds Caribbean. We
Right.
have a place where we can use it. So it just makes sense. It's feasible.
Yeah.
If we were to establish a similar partnership with a group in Port Royal, for example,
Right,
Yeah.
then a similar thing could happen.
okay, well, that is where I'm going.
Mm.
Second thing, there's a significant amount of interest out of Virgin
Mhm.
to look at the possibility of protecting forests and being able to utilize their work and their contribution in their marketing programs. Um, is that something that we could look at independent of all this research we're doing? Because the research seems to be taking a lot of time to get into the details
Right.
of how much carbon sequestering we have and all kind of thing.
All right.
But we do have some basic data.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm wondering if we can put together a package, go to Richard Branson and say, look, we would like you to be the patron through Virgin of the protection of the Blue and Jungle Mountain National Park. Give us $500,000 US per year.
It's definitely possible, but the answer is complex. And let's look at a few of the complexities in the answer. Yes, we're working on carbon trading. And carbon trading, we have to quantify. We have to do work to quantify how much carbon and what is the cost of carbon to establish a value to then sell credits. That is the groundwork that is necessary in order to trade carbon. And that is the lag that you're referring to. It's taking some time to figure this all out. Correct. If we were to put that aside for a second and engage an entity independent of that and say to them, look, we conserve the Blue and Jonquil Mountains. You see the work that we're doing. Contribute to this work because it is important to the country and it is important for your image as well as a brand, as an entity. And that company might say, yes, we are in agreement and we would like to partner with you and we would like to give you a lot of money to get this done. The complexity comes with the level and the value of the trade-off. So those are $500,000 contribution towards the protection and management of the Blue Mountains offset greater environmental damage that the same company might be partaking in. That is where the complexity comes in. So yes, we can do it otherwise, but we have to be very mindful of these kinds of things. because we would be very uncomfortable with shifting the problem, and not actually making a net improvement. So you can suppress the problem
I'm
here,
fully aware, fully
push it
aware,
all
but,
over.
but I'm just trying to see if there's a way that we can get this thing done in a more rapid fashion.
Understand? So yeah,
Furthermore,
I agree with you.
I think we can come to an arrangement with somebody like that, whereby once the data
Mhm.
gives you the information about what the level of sequestration is, then we can adjust the amount that is paid.
Right,
But
right,
certainly,
There's something we can start
off with a
something.
commitment.
All right, so let me give you let me propose to you a good medium. That's something that is already on the table and something that we're trying to revamp and push in a really aggressive manner. JCBT has a membership program and a corporate membership tier. There is opportunity for corporate partners to come on board, sign up to be, I don't remember what the premier level is. Dr. Tokan will talk about it in a second. But there's opportunity for these corporate entities to come on board and partner with us and give us this contribution towards management of the Blue Mountains. And that might be the best tool to exploit to get to where you're thinking. We can easily modify that as the data comes in to say, okay, would you like to graduate to this level now that we know that your contribution is worth this much carbon? Or would you like to purchase more carbon? Those kind of conversations.
All right, well, all I'm saying is let's move in that
Let's move in that
direction.
direction.
But to me, I mean, you know that I've been struggling with this thing for umpteen years.
Right.
And it does seem to be like you get more and more bureaucracy put in the way.
Right.
And more research is being done, and you hear say this one don't agree with that one and all.
So
I want to find a quick way to get a solution for us to get some serious money, because we cannot continue to depend on government, because clearly they are reducing their contributions, and we need to move in a direction where we can be more independent.
Right. So in my short career as an environmental professional, there's one thing I learned very quickly, and that's the silver bullet myth. Um, I don't know if there is one
No, there's no one.
there's no one quick and easy
But
solution.
let's approach this.
But there are solutions. I agree with you that there are solutions, and we should work assiduously, and we are working assiduously to get to these solutions. So, Dr. Otuokan is gonna share some closing remarks. Sorry.
You have to, because I think it's kind of getting in the weeds.
Yeah.
And so I would just want to discuss can we just give the vote time? I think you mentioned something. Okay.
Yeah. All right. I don't know.
All right.
Let's come right here.
Come a little bit closer.
Head of the delegation of the European Union based in Jamaica, to Ms. Deborah K. Connell, Director of the World Heritage and Cultural Convention at the Ministry of Culture, Gender, and Nepal, to Ms. Pedro Presley from Chatham University, other esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, and of course, our virtual viewers. I would like to, on behalf of the members of the JCT team, express our gratitude to you for participating in our international multi-day seminar, and we will learn a lot from the presentation. And I would then want to give special thanks to our speakers. They gave us a whole lot of information like this, and so I do want to express my thanks. To our partners and donors, including but not limited to the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sports, NECO, NRC, Biopharma, Inter-American Foundation, European Union, UNESCO, and Francino. We'd like to express our sincere thanks
or their support in implementation of the various projects that we have undertaken. Without their assistance, we would not be able to do anything, and so we continue to. And we look forward to your contribution. Much work is being done to conserve our natural resources, but there's a whole lot more that needs to be done. And so, I'm going to ask and going to ensure that you use today's seminar as a means to support or motivate you to action. You ask, what can I do? Or how can I help? You can help by joining as a friend of the Blue and Green Movement. We have a program where you would contribute annually, and the funds that you contribute we use to carry out various activities that we do to conservation. For example, invasive species control, or reforestation efforts, or educating the public around in the local community so that we can actually make an impact. You can also help by spreading awareness about the Blue and Green National Park. Tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your coworkers, have them visit the park and be an ambassador for the park. We ask that when you visit, not just for a national park, but when you visit any natural space, that you remember the roots of exploration, that you take memories and pictures. You leave only footprints and nothing but time. And finally, as you know, International Mountain Day is actually this Sunday, the 11th, and so we invite you to come to Halliwell. We're having a little bit of a ceremony, so come up and explore the mountains, and you might never know, you might have friends, something nice for the Christmas. Definitely come in and absorb and take in a bit of it. If you are going to, please remember to carry something to keep you warm, because it's December and although we don't have snow, we get pretty cold in Halloween. So thanks everyone for sticking with us. There's some refreshments at the back. Please do help yourself. But we have someone who's going to assist. And thank you so much for your time. And of course, if you have any questions, please stick around and
Oh, that's it? No, you cannot send that to Richard Branson.